Invisibility. Damn it.
Semi-permanent, like your dye job. Girls everywhere, some free advice. Don't trust your friends.
Welcome to the Witch Files. We are talking about the 2018 found footage movie, The Witch Files, directed by Carl Rankin. Easy way to describe this movie. This is The Craft meets Chronicle. So this tells the story of 5 young high school teenagers, these 5 girls, all of whom come from kind of a different kind of background, who through a breakfast style club detention, they kind of end up kind of forming a little bit of a bond and decide that as one of their numbers appears to be some type of Wiccan, some type of witch, the other 4 girls are kind of interested and decide they're going to form a coven. They do a couple of spells and ultimately find they actually have powers. They're able to harness these different powers, which at first they kind of use for trivial things, but as the movie progresses, things get more serious and the girls learn that there may well be consequences for using these powers. So let's talk The Witch Files. I've got to say, I quite enjoyed this movie. This movie was actually quite a lot of fun. It's a lower budget film, not quite the production value of movies like The Craft, like The Chronicle, but nonetheless, it definitely feels like a mishmash between those 2 properties. So let's talk about what works first of all. So for me, I've got to say I thought the acting was pretty good here. I thought all of our kind of our main girls, they're fairly broad stereotypes, but I thought they really kind of did well in their respective roles and kind of really kind of made you kind of believe that the roles that they were playing. You know, we have the bitchy girl, we got the nerdy girl, the sporty girl, the kind of the one that all she thinks about is kind of you know, her boyfriend, and of course we've got the kind of the gothy girl as well. I think they all do a good job of feeling kind of very kind of unique, but also you can kind of buy into their friendship, which is both a kind of a testament both to the acting and I feel the writing and the directing here. Now the characters, although they are quite broad stereotypes, I feel you all kind of quite like them. You like all of these girls, they all seem quite kind of like genuine people, and the way the story is written and some of the things that they do seem, you know, seem kind of petty and maybe kind of like silly at the time, but it's probably quite indicative of what maybe, you know, teenagers might be doing when they discover they have a little bit of power. And I thought that was a lot of fun. And this movie is a lot of fun. There's quite a lot of fun little scenes here. It's not a horror comedy, but there are a few kind of like amusing moments and a kind of amusing kind of situations that these girls get themselves into and actually have quite a lot of fun. And as we get these kind of girls doing a variety of different kind of more powerful spells such as flying and stuff like that, you feel the kind of the fun that they're having, getting revenge on kind of like teachers that are mean to them, stuff like that. And when it kind of turns sinister, I think this story does a good job of kind of like really kind of keeping you, you know, informed about what's going on, having the kind of the story laid out with some good kind of foreshadowing, kind of earlier on in the movie. What doesn't work for me, a couple of things to be honest with you, and these may seem relatively minor to a point. The first one for me was the reactions of both the girls when they're doing some significant magic and the people around them. So there's a couple of instances, for example, when they first start to fly, they just seem to be like very kind of blasé about it, and kind of they don't really seem too kind of freaked out when weird stuff starts to happen, like very kind of obvious weird stuff. You know, we're not talking just like, you know, moving a book and stuff. We have a scene earlier on where they actually levitate one of the kind of the girls. It's the first time we see a significant display of power. And there's no real kind of like, oh my god, freak out moments, which is a little bit of a shame because the girls act quite naturally until that point. But that kind of goes throughout the film. It's not just the kind of our 5 main girls. We have a kind of a big showdown towards the end, and this is kind of these other kind of people that are in the kind of the witnesses. Again, just don't really seem that freaked out that there's magical things happening right in front of them. The second thing I'll point out is the special effects and stunt work here, I've got to say, are a little poor. The special effects sometimes, well, the special effects aren't poor, but there are a couple of times where they don't quite line up properly with the way the actors are. So the actor will be doing like some kind of electricity, for example, and the way the actor is looking, it's not quite where the electricity goes and things like that. But the real thing for me was the kind of the stunt work here, because the stunt work when we have our action sequences is a little bit poor and a little bit kind of static. Well, there are a couple of action sequences towards the end of the movie, and the way I would describe it is, if you've ever played a kind of like a turn-based role-playing game on like a computer game or a video game, it's like that. It's about as fun as watching a kind of a turn-based, you know, role-playing game, because someone shoots something and then, you know, the other person kind of waits until they're finished and then they shoot something. So the actual action sequences are a little bit kind of unexciting, to be quite frank, and not particularly dynamic or not particularly kind of exciting. And there are some kind of fun visual effects when we have these kind of like magical kind of face-offs which happen throughout the movie, but they're just not shot in a way that is particularly exciting and particularly thrilling. The movie does take quite a lot from the movie Chronicle, I would say. This is essentially what Chronicle did for superheroes, this movie does for witches. It's very much a kind of a similar template. You know, we have these kind of girls discovering they have powers, and there's obviously these girls may not see eye to eye about how they want to kind of use them and stuff like that. There's kind of a deeper conspiracy that kind of goes with this, but I won't kind of go into what it is. So there are some problems with this movie, potentially down to maybe kind of some budgetary restraints, because obviously this is a lower budget movie compared to Chronicle and obviously Craft, which is the other movie I would sort of compare this to. And there's a little bit of a kind of, some of their reasons for keep filming are a little bit silly sometimes. It happens a lot with found footage films. I think some can get away with it and some can't. And there are a few times in this movie where you're thinking, do you know what, I think it's a little bit silly that they're kind of filming this one. I actually don't think this needed to be a found footage film. I thought it probably would have actually benefited from being a kind of a story, a straight narrative. With found footage, I always find sometimes it's a reason to kind of save money. But maybe this movie would have been more effective because of that. One thing I do like with this found footage movie in particular, however, is that there's always a lot of different people behind the camera. So when we have our point of view character, quite often she is in front of the camera because someone else will be holding it. So it's not just a kind of a faceless person. Everyone kind of gets their time in front of the camera. So I actually really enjoyed the actual characters here, the way they were very kind of well defined, and even though they were quite broad stereotypes, they were still kind of quite fun, and you kind of sympathise with them, kind of, you're still rooted for them, which I think is testament to the writing and the acting here for everyone that was involved. I feel this movie just lacked a little bit of finesse and kind of a little bit more of a maybe a couple more kind of like reshoots in regards to some of the kind of the action sequences, both in how they were delivered in regards to the actual fight scenes themselves, and then just people's reactions to it. They just seem so kind of like blasé and unrealistic. It would have been a little bit nicer to have maybe a little bit more excitement from the girls, because they just didn't seem that kind of like stressed out or kind of amazed by these magical things that are happening. And their actual performances are so believable, I think, in other areas. It's a shame that they weren't in this one. But overall, if you are a fan of kind of things like, I guess it's not really a horror film exactly, but it's obviously a supernatural based movie. So if you're in things like, you're into kind of like TV shows like Supernatural and Vampire Diaries, this one's right up your street. But if you just like a kind of a good sort of supernatural movie, not necessarily horror, maybe this borders on horror fantasy, I would say, then this is you know, you can do a lot worse with this. And I actually enjoy this because of the characters, I have to say. Well, the characters are all quite well rounded. To show me kind of maybe missed the beats on a couple of things. But overall, this movie is a lot of fun, and fans of the craft, which is getting on a bit now, I feel this is maybe a spiritual successor to that movie with the kind of the style of Chronicle. So overall, I would recommend this movie. Don't be expecting a horror per se, but a kind of a supernatural fantasy is probably a better way to put it. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. It's worth a watch. Just be aware of those couple of little issues that I kind of spoke about there. So yeah, have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.